Okay, so there are still a few people filing in, but I think we'll just get started and people can catch up. So hello everyone, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Tallulah Lutkin. I am Utilities Editor at Global Water Intelligence. And so I was one of the lead researchers on this white paper, so Rethinking Resilience, that was co-produced with Xylem. And so the purpose of this webinar today is to dig a little bit deeper into the research that myself and my colleagues conducted at GWI into resilience, utility capital investment, and also the role of the wider water stakeholder ecosystem in achieving resilience. So as I mentioned, this formed the basis of a white paper that came out in May that you can go and download. If you haven't already, there will also be a QR code for you to access the paper at the end of this presentation. So as I said, the topic of this webinar is rethinking resilience. And so we have done a previous webinar on this where we focused on how utilities are rethinking how they plan, how they invest in their infrastructure in the face of new climate extremes. And this time we're going to look both into the innovations that utilities need to achieve resilience and how it's also not just about utilities, but about the whole ecosystem of stakeholders around utilities that needs to come together to support this innovation and to support the building out of infrastructure for resilience. So you'll be hearing from me a little bit about some of our findings from the white paper, and then we have two water leaders from Australia and the UK, as well as our partner Xylem, who will also give a talk at the end. So this white paper was based on partly on data from NASA. So this chart was presented at the Global Water Summit. It's based on some new data, and it shows very clearly the correlation between rising global temperatures and the incidence of more intense droughts and floods. So rising temperatures being those scary orange and red bars, and the incidence of more intense droughts and floods in the black bars there. And so that obviously has a very clear impact on the water sector. What it means is that utilities and the wider water sector cannot continue doing things they used to do, be that in terms of planning, funding, procurement, innovation. If we want to be able to confront these extremes, there needs to be a change. So for utilities, in fact, this change is already happening. So we've seen for a while now that, but it's certainly accelerating with climate change, that there is an expansion of utility mandates. So traditionally, or at its very core, function of a water utility is to provide clean, safe drinking water to the community, and then to treat the wastewater and for that effluent to be compliant, and for that drinking water to be compliant with regulations. But we're seeing utility mandates expanding more and more to include other roles which are more closely tied to and becoming more and more critical with climate change. There's a whole role obviously related to stormwater, to flooding, how to manage that, water conservation, water resource management, water resource augmentation. Obviously that's critical, more and more critical with droughts. Increased pressure for rivers to be cleaner and cleaner so that they can be swimmable. Helping cities manage high temperatures by providing water for green spaces to alleviate the urban heat island effect. And there are even some utilities taking on coastal resilience. We're seeing this in Singapore, we're seeing this in New York, and this may happen with other cities as well. And I'm sure you can think of other examples of expanding utility mandates. So it's just getting bigger and bigger. And simply put, what this means is that utilities have become, and one might say that they already are, the default agencies for resilience in their communities. But more often than not, the regulations and the expectations around these new mandates are a lot less clear than for the core mandate, and that's why they need the help of the whole stakeholder infrastructure. Now, these expanding mandates mean that utilities need to build more infrastructure, probably a lot more infrastructure. We've sort of predicted that if we were to achieve the same level of resilience that we currently enjoy, utilities would have to invest about 16.5 trillion in capital investment worldwide by 2040. And as we said in our previous webinar, that's pretty much not possible. And that's why it needs a rethink of the way that everything is done, a rethink of how funding is done. And also we need to rely heavily on innovation. So yeah, so our premise is the fact that, in fact, utilities in the whole water sector need to rethink how they're going to achieve resilience. And a huge part of that is going to be innovation. So that's innovation in the regulatory space, in the funding space, the procurement space, as well as in the technological sphere, so that we can bring massive optimizations and enable utilities to do two things differently, so that essentially they don't have to brute force resilience, but they can actually achieve it through optimization. And I want to emphasize that, in these innovations, they can't be achieved by utilities alone. Utilities are doing a massive amount already. They need the support of their stakeholder ecosystem. So what does that look like? On the regulatory side, there are many challenges. Utilities can lack autonomy over their capital budgets, over their planning timelines. Regulatory frameworks or institutional frameworks might not account for long-term resilience plans, which are required for climate adaptation. There can be fragmented responsibilities. We've been talking about the expanded utility mandate, but it's actually not necessarily common that one utility has autonomy and a handle over all of those aspects. So there's a lot of cooperation that needs to go on. And of course, there are funding gaps that persist, especially for mandates like stormwater, coastal resilience. We heard from New York that they've been given a mandate for coastal resilience, but actually not necessarily any specific funding allocated to that. So that's an example of an issue where there's a misalignment between the funding and the expectation. So what can institutional stakeholders do? They can support and approve long-term investment plans, so they can support the fact that utilities need these longer plans, and that also goes with supporting tariff reform. So aligning capital investments with tariff reform can also be an effective way of ensuring that those investments are actually achieved, and also giving investors the security that they need. Setting clear mandates and frameworks that enable utilities to know what they might have taken on this mandate because they have no choice, but it's obviously clear if there's a framework around that. And that can go with enabling legislation. It can also go with legislation that can enable new technologies as well. So obviously the water sector needs to be risk averse in terms of technology because the consequences can be terrifying. But there's also a way that the legislation and regulations can support technology. And obviously there's a whole element on finance as well. So allocating more public funding, but also making the water sector more attractive to blended finance and private finance as well. And on the supply chain side, so what can the supply chain do to help the utilities? Challenges, obviously, high cost and complexity of implementing new technologies. We've talked about how the water sector is and needs to be risk averse to a certain degree. And also sometimes a lack of standardized procurement. So we see this for water reuse, we see this for nature-based solutions, that it's sometimes difficult for utilities to see what the procurement model might be because it changes from project to project. Limited visibility of proven innovations. So, some utilities need to take the plunge and need to test out these innovations, and that can be a little bit difficult. And so there needs to be better management of how these technologies are actually going to improve utilities' operations. And obviously, again, we've spoken about this question of being risk averse or risk averse procurement. And so how do we enable utilities to be slightly more courageous with their innovation while still remaining compliant and safe? And so what can the supply chain do? The utility needs scalable, cost-effective solutions, so things that they can implement relatively quickly, but they also know that they're going to be effective. Flexible delivery models, things where utilities and the supply chain can share the risk, that can help accelerate deployment as well. Standardizing procurement, in particular for big projects like reuse, and also, of course, collaborating more with utilities to pilot and to validate emerging technologies. And that's something that's really important so that utilities can really see the benefit and don't feel that they're alone in what they're doing. So yeah, that concludes my presentation, and I'm going to hand over now to our speakers who are going to tell you a little bit more about how this plays out in their respective areas. So I'm going to hand over to Adam Lovell, who is the Executive Director of the Water Services Association in Australia, who's going to tell us a little bit about what resilience and innovation looks like in Australia. So.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Beautiful. There we go.
Amazing.
Sorry, sorry I couldn't be on camera, but thanks for having me. I'm Adam Lovell, Executive Director of Water Service Association of Australia. Next slide, please. Tallulah. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands of which I'm meeting you from, and for me, I'm meeting you from Camaragal lands, a part of the Eora Nation, which for many of you will know as Sydney. I pay my respects to the deep cultural connection that Aboriginal First and Torres Strait Islanders have to land and country over many thousands of years. Water Service Association, who are we? Who are we? Well, we're the peak industry body for all the water utilities around Australia, plus a couple over in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And we bring together our members to collaborate, to talk about policy, talk about innovation, talk about just about anything there is to do with reticulated water services and sanitation services as well. And our members cover the whole country. Next slide, please, Tallulah. Just to give you an idea about what that looks like. Well, okay, first of all, I'll go to our strategy. And that this basically highlights, it's almost an industry strategy, what you're looking at there. And at the top of the tree for us always is water security. We're finding that in a climate impacted world, many of our members are needing to really diversify their water supplies to cover the risk portfolio that they're looking at for water supply purposes. So you'll see seawater desalination, purified recycled water, typical dam supplies or reservoir supplies, you might know them, groundwater supplies, stormwater, is pretty much all there. We also looking very much now at a resilient and regenerative future, also in the face of climate change, and particularly supplying clean water and sanitations to First Nations communities across the country. Next slide, Tallulah. So across the country there you can see quite a diverse range of the way water services are delivered. Many of our members are state-owned corporations, so they are structured like a corpse oil company, full value chain right through from catchment management through to wastewater disposal to the environment, recycling and desal. I'm going to highlight three today. I'm talking about Perth, Sydney and the Gold Coast as a couple of quick case studies. Perth is on western, over there on the left there, Western Australia, a city they call the world's most remote city of above 2 million people. Western Australia itself is serviced by Water Corporation, by one utility which covers 2.5 million square kilometres. So it's quite a large geographic area, but very much concentrated in Perth. Over to the east coast, you've got the Gold Coast in southeast Queensland, very much growing at the moment and looking forward to the Olympics in 2032. And then, of course, you've got Sydney down to Melbourne. Next slide, please, Tallulah. I'm going to start with, maybe many of you heard about the recent cyclone Alfred, which was hovering around, teasing everybody in Australia. Will it cross the coast or won't it? Anyway, it did venture right down to opposite the Gold Coast and Brisbane, very heavily populated part of southeast Queensland. And then it decided it took a massive right turn and started to head in, courtesy of some shear winds from jet streams and other high pressure systems. And you can see it even managed to do a little loop there just to tease everybody even more. But in all seriousness, this was a massive, as it approached the coast, it was actually downgraded to a Category 1 cyclone, but it delivered massive amounts of rainfall. And what we've seen in Australia, particularly on the East Coast, is year after year of La Nina events, unprecedented rainfall, in fact, when it rains. Next slide, Tallulah. And so you can see from this diagram here the forecast path of the cyclone, which hit in March, and then as it hit the coast, then disappeared. Well, came right down even towards Sydney and further south of that. So it delivered massive amounts of rainfall. And at the time, it was quite a significant cyclone, and you can imagine a lot of disaster areas were put in place. Disaster plans were put in place and enacted. The Gold Coast, for context, is a very low-lying area. It's got a hinterland at the back, not very high mountains, but a hinterland nonetheless, which basically means that as the rain hits the coast, it gets sandwiched in. It doesn't move. And it was pretty much stationary for 2 days, a rainfall event. Next slide, Tallulah. And so you can see the world famous Gold Coast beaches. That's the lifeguard stand. So millions and millions and millions of tons of sand have since been pumped back onto the beach. It is a tourist destination, so there's a big economic impact. But the whole hundreds of kilometres of beach were just washed away by this event. So luckily there was no loss of life. Of course, there were injuries. And there were some very close calls, but the economic impact was massive. Next slide, Tallulah. And so what the Gold Coast have done is very much, just last week, in fact, launched their climate resilience strategy plan, very much based around flooding and mitigation of flooding, but they do include a mitigation on to achieve net zero. I think the important context, if you go to the next slide, Tallulah, the important context for Gold Coast is, unlike other water utilities in Australia, it's council owned. So in other words, the governance is not doesn't start at an independent board. It starts with a mayor and councillors, which often, and for many of you probably on this call, often tosses up some interesting aspects of the way people view things. Now, the demographics of Southeast Queensland, you'll get a lot more people who probably don't subscribe to climate change. And so that would play out in the council. And so this was actually a huge effort. I take my hat off to the City of Gold Coast for actually developing this climate resilience plan and getting it through council, and it is now official. But it is very much focused on climate resilience, very much on flood resilience, and also sea level rise, because deeply impacted. So that's all available on their website. But I just wanted to highlight, the governance there was really tough for this council, which is from a WASA membership, is the largest council that we have in our membership, with well over 500,000 people. Next slide, Tallulah. So moving on, I'm going to shift over to Sydney, and in particular, a really interesting change in governance for Sydney Water, who have traditionally, Sydney Water services about 5.5 million people. Again, water, wastewater services, although now called resource recovery facilities, recycle water to a very high level, and heading down the path of purified recycled water and desal as well. Now they're moving into stormwater recycling. And next slide, Tallulah. Mamre Road is out there in the west. You can see out there in the west. It's the hottest and driest part of Sydney. Sometimes in January can reach well over 48 degrees day after day, and there's no tree cover right now. It was back in its day, it was levelled for farmland. It is now the home for the major growth part of Sydney, a major new airport about to open next year. And Sydney Water have taken over this road area called the Mamre Road Project. They are taking over being the single regional water owner. So the whole kit and caboodle, but now including stormwater, which have never done before. So this is a really new model. What does it mean in terms of governance? Well, IPART, their independent price tribunal, had never had to go through this sort of proposal. When local government runs stormwater in Sydney, there's about 40 of them. It's an interesting kaleidoscope of different policies and different capabilities of managing stormwater. So this was one way of Sydney Water saying, we'll take over this whole area, this whole development area, and run it as the single waterway manager, which IPART had never done before, never set a price before. And so that's been a very challenging thing. Sydney Water would argue that they haven't got the costs that they need. Nevertheless, they're pushing on with this project. But it is a mixture of both recycled water from a brand new water recycling facility that they're building, and I'm going to show that in a moment, and recycled water and stormwater, so that there's a constant flow of water for urban greening, for cooling, and for any other sort of water use, parklands, the whole kit and caboodle, and some industrial reuse as well. So this is a really innovative project which we're all watching very closely, and we're all barracking for Sydney Water's success. Yeah, we'll wait and see. It's just at the start right now. They're just digging the ground and starting this right off as we speak. So Tallulah, next slide. It's all part of a circular economy precinct, a massive precinct that they're building, and I should go on to the next slide, that Sydney Water have developed, and part of this also includes a circular economy zone where they've just finished an EOI process, asking for bids for people to come in, all sorts of things, because they're close to the airport, very close to this brand new airport. They're looking at sustainable aviation food waste to bioenergy, biochar, the whole, anything that's in a circular economy context. They've sought proposals, but this is a massive facility. It will eventually probably push on towards being purified recycled water for drinking. But you can see there on that on this site, there's a lot of green space and a lot of space for Indigenous caring for country as well, and that's a really important part of this project. So that, in fact, the major water assets are almost complete. The next part of this will be building the circular economy zone, all part of becoming more resilient as a utility. Next slide, please, Tallulah. And I'll keep pushing on. Only a couple of slides left. Let's go to the other side of the country. If any city in the world has faced climate change, it is Perth. Its rainfall typically you would see typically is in winter here, which is right now. You would see a filling season probably in about 300 gigs per litre, 300 gigs into their 14 quite small dams or reservoirs. And quite often over the past decade, that's gone down to 30, 10, 15. So you can see that Perth can no longer rely on dams. Dams are nice to have. What they need to have is manufactured water. So they're currently building their third desalination plant. They've also got groundwater replenishment for purified recycled water. So you can see there at the 2030 edge there on the right, the makeup of their water supplies, and that will change again into 2040 and 2050, probably with more purified recycled water. So if anything, Perth is moving towards manufactured water as their primary water source. It is all about being resilient, and it's just necessity. It's absolute necessity that they need to do this. So final slide, I think, Tallulah. So nothing beats being a resilient water utility than engaging your customers. And I just wanted to show you here quite a bit of work that Sydney Water is doing, just flipping back to Sydney Water for a second, on its purified recycled water journey. They've opened up a discovery centre out at a facility where they plan to do the purified recycled water. They've had many visitors, a lot of politicians, a lot of elected officials, and really putting it out there. But this is not happening tomorrow. It's not happening next year. It probably won't even happen the year after. It is all about an engagement strategy to make sure that customers and community are absolutely comfortable that purified recycled water is a source that they will include as an option for the future. And as I said, nothing beats resilience than having your customers on the journey with you 100% of the way. And I think that's my final slide. Thanks, Tallulah. I think there's a finishing slide. So very welcome for people to reach out to me or to the team, or look up our website there for further information. Thanks a lot.
That's great, Adam. Thank you so much for that. It's really interesting, and a really great example from Sydney of the expanded utility mandate across one project, from stormwater all the way to the sort of cooling city and helping with urban cooling. So that's really, really interesting. Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Shaunna Berendsen from Anglian Water from the UK, so for a utility perspective on resilience and innovation. Over to you, Shaunna.
Amazing, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Really great to share the stage with Adam, Alexis, and of course the fantastic Tallulah. Since I'm the only specific utility and we're a regional one at that, my presentation is going to be very much Anglian centric, but having seen most, if not all, of the PR24 plans of the other UK utilities, ours doesn't differ all that dramatically. So safe to say this might be a UK utility view in general. So if we can go to the first slide, please. So firstly, some Anglian regional stats. We're geographically the largest water and wastewater company in England and Wales, serving more than 7 million customers and employing more than 6,000 employees. We operate and maintain nearly 40,000 kilometres of water mains, which, for the benefit of Adam and having an Australian fact, means that if laid end to end, it's a trip further than Sydney and back. We operate over 77,000 kilometres of water recycling wastewater pipes, which again, laid end to end, is almost twice around the Earth's circumference. So resilience is something that is innately Anglian. It's been on our radar for a very long time. For example, we pump less water into the supply every day now than we did in 1989, despite supplying 26% more homes. We're also a proudly heavily metered region, with 88% of homes being fitted with a water meter, meaning we have a wealth of data that we have the luxury of acting on. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So before discussing how we lean in, I thought I ought to frame the scale of the challenge. So these are some of the headlines that were from our climate change adaptation report. Don't worry that the graphs and the stats are small. It's readily available for anyone that wishes to see it. But what we can surmise from that report is that climate change is no longer a future threat. So within Anglian Water, we're really feeling the effects of climate change today. In recent years, like Adam mentioned, with Australia, we've witnessed more flooding, increased risk of droughts, in rising temperatures, rising sea levels, and in fact, since our last climate change adaptation report in 2020, we've experienced extreme weather events. So a huge drought in 2022 with the highest temperatures ever recorded in the UK, being in our region in the east of England, followed by the unprecedented wet weather and a succession of storms in 23-24. So on top of this, we're one of the hottest and driest parts of the UK and continue to be a rapidly growing region. And to contextualise that, we're expected to connect a further 700,000 homes by 2040. So it's a sizable challenge. If we can go to the next slide, please. So how do we lean in when it comes to resilience, especially in the light of climate change? So in the UK, for those that don't know, we have a price review process conducted by Ofwat, our economic regulator, every 5 years, who regulate our pricing and service commitments. We submit detailed business plans, and so some of these figures have come from the most recent one, which is PR24. So we have a record investment program which will see us invest 11 billion over the 25 to 30 period, which again, to contextualise that, is a £4 billion increase from PR19, so effectively doubled. For additional context, this is the largest water sector investment since privatisation, and includes a major focus on climate resilient infrastructure, for example, the Strategic Pipeline Alliance, more on that later, water recycling, stormwater overflow upgrades, and nature-based flood and drought mitigation. We've also have £4 billion attributed directly in the environmental improvements to reduce stormwater overflow discharges, and have targets to cut leakage and improve river water quality. Then when it comes to core infrastructure resilient initiatives, we've got strategic resource options, or SROs, of which we will see the construction of 2 major reservoirs, one in the Fens and one in Lincolnshire. These are designed to secure long-term water supply and address increasing demand due to population growth and climate change. Then on infrastructure resilience, we have £81 million worth of plans to strengthen infrastructure against climate change and population growth. And that includes a real emphasis on asset health, including reducing mains bursts and sewer collapses. Obviously, being the Chief Innovation Officer, it'd be remiss of me not to speak about innovation as part of these individual headlines, but also on its own. So we are expected to deliver greater value for money for our customers through innovation, both organically, but also with the dawn of the Ofwat Innovation Fund, which started in the last AMP. And we have a targeted plan for innovation, and I'll draw on a few resilience and climate change innovation projects later. Then on the customer side and service enhancements, we've set aside £108 million to help customers reduce water wastage and water usage in general. So £233 million to improve drinking water quality, and a real focus on reducing external sewer flooding and supply interruptions. Continuing the theme of customers, despite this heavy investment, we maintain a customer and community focus, ensuring affordability, and so to contextualise that, bills will rise by just 11p a day in 2025. So we still want to keep water affordable. Finally, I don't think it's possible to separate resilience of our sector without talking resilience of our people. Hugely important to me, and a very worrying stat. 70% of the UK water workforce is eyeing an exit in the next 2 years, according to the latest headlines. So we've expedited our work on employee resilience and the employee value proposition, because the last thing you need in a climate crisis is for your talent to leave. If we can go to the next slide, please. So when it comes to infrastructure resilience, we can look at both making the existing more resilient, but at the same time secure water supplies for future generations by creating new opportunities to capture, store and move water. So the Strategic Pipeline Alliance, and I appreciate it's been around for a good few years already, and we've been talking about it for a long time, but we're at the halfway point now, so I thought it would be good to provide an update on that. So the Strategic Pipeline Alliance, or SPA, is creating a new network of hundreds of kilometres of interconnecting pipes and associated infrastructure to keep fresh, clean water flowing across our region. It is the largest infrastructure programme Anglian have ever seen, and a vital element in our plans to meet future water demands and secure water supplies across the region. It's a hugely ambitious project, and one that's requiring a lot of innovative solutions to bring it to life. It is, once operational, it will have a digital twin of the asset, and so it can be optimised in real time, saving water and energy. So I guess the question is, why do we need SPA? And the answer lays within the Anglian Water Resources Management Plan. So that strategy, which sets out Anglian's plan for the next 25 years, we know that by 2050, and on that graph there, we'll have 38% less water, but an additional 900,000 homes to serve. So as you can see on screen, forecasts show that over time, we will definitely move into a water deficit if we don't do anything. And as I mentioned, Anglian is one of the driest regions in the UK, and the mix of the rapidly growing population with the unprecedented heat waves of the last few summers, it really highlights the need to plan for resilience and tackle future water shortages. So without SPA, simply put, demand for water would outstrip supply, meaning the east of England could run out of water by as soon as 2030, which is quite a horrifying fact. So this pipeline will stretch from North Lincolnshire to Essex, and will allow water to be moved around our region from areas of the north to areas of the south, and back again where we need it. So we've reached, as I said, we've reached our halfway point. We've laid 220 kilometres of pipe in the ground. We're making fantastic progress, and that includes the supporting infrastructure like pumping stations and storage reservoirs as well. If we can go to the next slide, please. But we can also think differently about the communities that we serve to enable resilience. So enabling more smart communities, and I did say I would speak about some innovation projects. So this was an Ofwat innovation funded project exploring the relationship between integrated water management, community engagement and practices, and housing developments to unlock opportunities for cross-sector delivery and stewardship. The enabling water smart community models encompasses 3 essential building blocks for water smart communities: value, stewardship, and assets. So we know, and Tallulah mentioned earlier, technology alone cannot deliver water smart communities, and solutions for enabling water smart communities will need to combine technology with regulation, industrial and social practices, and ways of imagining or sometimes reimagining society. So across water and housing stakeholders, there are many perspectives, aspirations, priorities, obligations, capacities and capabilities that inform how individuals and communities and organisations act. To date, Enabling Water Smart Communities has delivered more than 8 projects, reports and outputs, developed an engaged community, delivered a series of webinars with high attendance and engagement. And the project has also received press coverage from industry and national publications, and was cited in the recent Independent Water Commission final report in the section that gave its backing to rainwater harvesting. So it's really making waves within the UK. And all of that information and shared learning is available on our website. If we go to the next slide, please, and I promise I'm nearly at the end now. A second innovation project I wanted to highlight was Credo. So Credo, or the Climate Resilient Demonstrator, which is what it stands for, is a pioneering climate adaptation digital twin project that provides a practical example of how connected data can improve climate adaptation and resilience across a system of systems. So the aim of the Credo Extreme Heat project was to improve the water sector's understanding of the impact of extreme heat on assets through the development of, firstly, a probabilistic asset failure models, so supported through expert elicitation methodology to obtain data on impact of extreme heat on assets, which was previously not otherwise available. And secondly, a Credo asset risk tool. So this is an online extreme heat projection model developed for use by the water sector to forecast future extreme heat events and their probable impact on assets and systems. Again, this was an Ofwat Innovation Fund project, and we are going out with a second Credo 2, rather unimaginary name for it, but we think there's still more work to do in that space. So, but to date, Credo has demonstrated the benefits of a joined up approach and how better information and coordination across infrastructure enables providers to identify better solutions. And the collaboration through connected digital twins is key to tackling that climate change. So the Credo vision is to make systems-based decision optimization on a climate change reality. So very relevant to this webinar. So as Credo develops, it will enable asset owners, regulators, policymakers to collaborate and use the Credo digital twin to make decisions that maximize resilience across the infrastructure system. And the Credo Asset Risk Tool is the first step towards enabling that vision within the water sector and is available for all to use. So again, available on our Innovation Hub website. And last slide, please, Tallulah. But all of these plans would be in vain if we didn't have the talent to deliver it, which is where people resilience comes in. So as I mentioned in the start, the Water Industry Jobs Report interviewed nearly 4,000 professionals working in the UK water sector. So it was a significant study, and the report analyses the current issues concerning recruitment and retention of employees in the industry. It highlights that over a quarter, so 26%, identify employment and skill shortages as the most pressing issue, and 42% of respondents indicated that inadequate access across training hinders their ability to be innovative in their roles, which is something that we're looking towards solving. So several factors are driving this potential exodus, which I should add also includes an aging workforce. So it does encompass that retirement cliff edge. Talent drain to other sectors, a limited influx of new workers, but the lack of new people entering the industry combined with pre-existing skill shortages and the likelihood of increasing workloads as key infrastructure projects are implemented should be a major concern for employers, is what the report states. And naturally, that isn't being helped by the ongoing negative narrative of the UK water sector. So keeping our employees resilient is as important as the assets and the resilience of the assets themselves. But that's me done, Tallulah.
Great, thank you so much, Shaunna. That was a really interesting presentation, and there were quite a few questions popping in the chat, so we'll have to address those in Q&A in a minute. But first of all, before that, I'm going to hand over to our last speaker, Alexis de Kerchove from Xylem, who's going to give us a little bit more of an overview of the sector from his perspective, and then we can move on to Q&A. Over to you, Alexis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tallulah, and I'm really happy to be part of this webinar and witness also the great stories that we got from Adam and Shaunna. Thank you very much for sharing them with us, those success and also those threats that we see forward. And it leads me to my segment where we want to cover water resilience, and as a personal perspective, I see this as one of the biggest infrastructure challenge of the 21st century. I am Alexis de Kerchove. I am Senior Director of Client Sustainability at Xylem. I'm based in Stockholm and mostly work across Europe, but also across other regions. And the water resilience issue is something that we witness globally, obviously. And if you go to the next slide, the more we learn about it, the more we hear that as our expert, our George Hawkins friends and experts, former CEO of DC Water mentioned, it's not just about fixing pipe, it's also about fixing organizations that fix pipes. That's the way mostly I will see it. We do have mostly organization governance issues to address water resilience. There is so much to do on that end. So it will lead me a little bit to the structure of my presentations today, which looks at several aspects of how water resilience can be built over within our infrastructures, within our water management systems. And if you go to the next slide, based on learnings, we want to basically transit from our conventional management systems to basically resilient resource recovery platform, as Adam mentioned it in his example of Sydney, which is exemplary. I'd like to address 5 different approaches. One that I will not mention much because we hear a lot about technology availability. I still do have a question mark because I do always welcome new technology forward that we don't know or that we still need to develop. But the one I'd like to enhance most are regulatory framework, funding availability, governance, and people. For each of those, look at what actually happens currently, especially focusing on Europe, and see where are potential warnings and risks within each of those, because as we move forward, these systems are put in place and learnings are made based on mistakes, not perfect systems, and so on. And those are the ones that we need to learn from, right? So if you go to regulatory framework, focusing on Europe, next slide, please, Tallulah. Europe, you may have heard, has recently launched the Water Resilience Strategy document, which basically frames a comprehensive strategy for achieving water resilience up to 2030 and 2050. The key highlight of this document is really to put water efficiency principle first, the same way as energy efficiency principle has been launched a couple of years ago. Digitalization of water is a core activity to the documents. We look into EU-wide initiatives on smart meterings of all, which very much support the water efficiency principle. Water reuse is core to the document as well, and we really embrace that, looking at, as it was highlighted by Adam, that surface and groundwater are getting more scarce, and having productions of water from our facilities is a key source that we need to enhance. The funding and alternative model of fundings are really enhanced within the framework, and we look at the EIB launching programs for funding, but also public-private partnership being very important tools within this. So we look at this framework as building a stronger Europe and making it the leader in water management systems. However, regulatory are not always the key, or not always successful at implementing change or promoting change. And as an example, and I would like to bring this as a warning for us to learn from, we see that too much complexity and too high precautions can be counterproductive. The example that I'll highlight here is the water reuse for agriculture and irrigations regulations that has been launched in 2022. And we see that the regulations really aimed at promoting water reuse and opening boundaries for commercial use of products irrigated by reused water. But unfortunately, the high weights on administrative burdens for access to permits, risk assessments, has been a kind of a drawing back these regulations and limiting its implementation across Europe. So there is a lot of learnings of how regulation can help and what should or should not be part of it. If we go to the next point in the discussion, funding availability. Next slide, Tallulah. The funding availability is something critical, and of course, a business model supports it as well. EU, across Europe, we understand, and it was published by Water Europe recently, probably needs more than 255 billion euro by 2030, cumulative to existing investments just to meet the water directives, the drinking water directive and the wastewater treatment directives. That additional investment needs across water utilities is massive, and it's not including what agriculture and industry and defense will take for boosting their access to more water. So basically, the funding source and mechanisms do exist. I mean, we need to see that recently, I think no later than this month, Europe Commission's published its memo on the multi-annual financial framework for 2028-2034, and announced that about 1.7 trillion euro will be invested. Unfortunately, it's not all in water. That would be amazing. But from that 1.7 trillion, we know that buckets will be associated to water, especially in the economic, social, and territorial cohesion, where we can hope for a significant amount of investments toward infrastructure. We also know that water will be present in the competitiveness, prosperity, and security, boosting industrial investments, investment in water for industries, and also in global water buckets, which you see on number 3 here on the bottom, which promotes the innovations on water as well. We still don't know how much will be funded there, but we feel like the mechanism will be in place to support the needs of water resilience. Again, a warning that we see, funding might be available, but mechanisms are not always there to make that funding used by the utility, which are the end users of those projects. And we have a great example of the post-COVID resilience and recovery fund across Europe. At that time, if you recall, about 12.9 billion investments were made available to the member states across Europe for rebuilding their water infrastructures after COVID. They have to use it between 2021 and 2027, so they're still not closed that period. When we look at that amount of funding, only 1.3 billion has been used to date, meaning that there is still 11.6 available unspent. And that is because of some administrative burdens and lack of reforms to make that money available for projects. No, I'm not the one to judge here. I just flag the fact that there is a gap in the way that funds can be made available to the end users in projects for building new infrastructure. So funding and regulatory are there as a ground base across Europe to really boost water resilience. Our next challenge, if you go there, Tallulah, on the next slide, is governance. Governance was already flagged across the across Adam's and Shaunna's discussion. It is extremely important to engage other stakeholders across. You mentioned, Tallulah, that the utilities are the stakeholder, the institution that is embracing or endorsing the water resilience responsibility. However, we all know that it cannot be appointed to only the water utilities. So many stakeholders are using water in the basin, and it needs to be shared. So if we go to the next slide, we understand that the climate risk is massive globally, but at the same time, we see defense competitiveness and new economies boosting their need of water. Water Europe published a recent document showing that by 2030, just the production of semiconductors in Europe will need about 90 million meter cube of water per month, which is a massive increase to what we currently have. That's only for semiconductors. You think also of energies and other businesses that are growing like that with AI support. We need to break the silos of how water is being used across basins right now. Right now, everybody is looking at, okay, what is the social use with water utilities? What are the industrial use? What is the agricultural use? It is critical, I think, to bring those sectors together to address water resilience and protect resources. I'd like here, instead of highlighting a warning, to give a case story of the city of Chennai in India, who implemented water reuse for industrial purposes. And they realized that it's by building that collaborations with the other stakeholders across the water basin that you could actually promote water resource protections. In this case, they implemented a 40 million liter per day reverse osmosis and ozone plant, to which we had a chance to contribute with, and enabled to reuse about 16 million meter cube per year, making Chennai the first Indian city to reuse over 20% of its treated wastewater. This type of collaborations is critical, and we need to see this moving forward. The last challenge that I'd like to highlight here, and hopefully I have a couple more minutes, is people. And I'll be brief here because Shaunna already made a huge point on this. We are facing a crisis in aging workforce and also skill gap within the water utility sector. And if you go to the next slide, Tallulah, we understand that I'm not gonna rework on the data because obviously Shaunna had like even more alarming data than I do. But we do face two big issues. First is the image of the water sector and water utilities. It's not only in the UK that the image is relatively poor and needs to be rebranded. And second, the aging workforce is there. It's a critical challenge. We know that operators are getting old, and we need to find youth across the board to fill those gaps. Youth that has new skills, skills towards AI, skills towards digital solutions, and others. And also reskilling existing operators, because we have a lot of existing power and workforce that are really capable of learning and are eager to probably go into those directions. So reskilling existing workforce is also important. As a final example here to the presentations, I'd like to highlight the case of Global Omnium, the utility in Valencia, that recently or last decade implemented a digital twin on their drinking water system to boost efficiency. Building a digital twin doesn't only comes with implementing a technology, it also comes with making sure that the local staff is being trained on digital solutions and that there is cross-functional collaborations within the operation. Valencia or Global Omnium lead their global success of that implementations, leading to huge reductions on non-revenue water, but also boosting operational efficiencies across municipalities. And something that has not been talked about Valencia is, as you all know, the devastating floods happened last year. And it is unfortunately not shared enough that thanks to this digital twin across the drinking water system, rebuilding and restarting the drinking water systems post-flooding has been done in less than 48 hours. And kudos to Dioniso Garcia, the CEO of Global Omnium, who has been able to lead that effort and make sure that the system based on digital solutions could be re-engaging the systems and making drinking water available to the population there after the flooding. So this closed my my speech. I'd like to go to the final quote of friend and leader of Rohit Agarwala, Chief Climate Officer of the New York City. And again, resilience, as he says, of city depends more on how fast you adapt your infrastructure system than how strong they were when they were built. Now we are in a race. We need to get there. It's a massive infrastructure transformation, and speed is important. Thank you very much, Tallulah, and I will close here.
Great, thanks so much, Alexis. That was really interesting, and I think it was important for you to build in those warnings as well. I mean, as much as we want to make improvements, sometimes things don't quite go to plan. So that was definitely really enlightening. So we still have a few minutes for questions. Hopefully, I can keep my panelists a little bit over time. But yeah, if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat. And also, here's a QR code to download the white paper, Rethinking Resilience, if you haven't had the chance to look at it already. We had one question come in for Adam in particular, and that was about the question of desalination and whether the overuse of desalination can affect ocean health in the long term. And I'd like to extend that a little bit maybe on to this question of how utilities balance the different priorities of resilience, right? So there are things that can impact resilience, but might be not so great for net zero. So, how do you support utilities to enable them to make the right decisions, I guess the right net decisions when it comes to all of these resilience issues?
Sure. I'll just try and give a really quick answer to that one. When every capital city in Australia now has a desal plant, Perth obviously moving towards 3. At the time, there was various commitments to have them 100% powered by green power. It's probably less of a priority right now, but that's still the case for the major desal plants, but less of a priority. There's different ways of, it's not sort of building a sort of solar plant down the road or anything like that. They're connected up, and the whole of Southeast Australia is actually connected up by grid. So there's different ways of actually powering the desal plants. It's definitely a concern. 100% customers love water recycling above desalination. Customers on the whole accept desalination as a very secure, high-yield water source. So it's supported in that respect. But anything to do with recycled water, customers love. When it comes to the actual environmental impacts, the desal plants, as they are situated in very high energy zones. And if they're not, there's one of Perth is not so high energy. So the mixing zone is less than 50 meters to background seawater level, sea salt levels. There's special measures put in place to ensure that environmental concerns are met.
That's great. Thanks for that answer. Yeah. And I have one for Shaunna as well. So something that pertains to, what I was kind of alluding to at the beginning about this question of extreme events becoming more and more likely. And I think that Anglian, that's something that you're looking to in terms of drought in particular. And so when it comes to water supply, where is Anglian at with achieving its ambitions to be resilient for a 1 in 200 year drought, say?
Yeah, so our good adaptation progress is reducing the risk, but our score has not reduced yet to meet the 2025 target, and we've not managed to achieve that resilient 1 in 200 year drought event, and that's mainly due to delays in our Strategic Pipeline Alliance, the project that I mentioned earlier. But over the next 5 years, we will achieve that 1 in 200 year drought resilience target and be on our way to solving the 1 in 100 year drought resilience.
That's a great answer. And yeah, we had a couple of questions, a couple of technical questions for you, Shaunna, as well. So some quick fire questions about the non-revenue water rate at Anglian and the diameter of the new strategic pipeline. How big is it? What are we talking?
Oh, so it varies based on the ground that it's going through, but all of those details will be on our website. So they're all readily available, and if they're not, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and I can get you the real specifics.
No, that sounds great. And yeah, I think that it's a really interesting question actually for Alexis, because I've about this water resilience, I guess, strategy that the EU is trying to put in place. You know, is there anything in there that you feel is really lacking? And also, I've been wondering about their definition of resilience, and I think that, you know, here with our white paper Rethinking Resilience, we focus quite specifically on climate resilience, and you know, but it's the question of how one chops and change and how one categorizes this definition of resilience. Is there anything that you think, you know, maybe has been overlooked, or maybe that shouldn't be included and is included, or yeah?
It's a good question, and so the definition of resilience for that document is a bit broader than what we have here in the paper. It does look at the climate risk, but also the growing risk of increasing demand in water from industry, agriculture, and social needs, plus other risks, including defense needs and seeing water as a critical infrastructure on the defense side. So the second part of your question is anything they're missing? At this stage, it's a bit hard to say because this document is in its early phase, which means that it's listing the categories of focus points that will be further digged in the coming documents, in the future documents, and so on. So far, we are quite, let's say, happy and in peace with what's already framed. It's a good start. We do want to make sure, however, that the governance and business model approach is really well tackled, because as we see through the different witnessing here, it's an issue, right? You mentioned it as well. I mean, supply chain, how do we make sure that technology adoption is really facilitated? And then the skilling of people needs to be really boosted, and that's not as easy as it sounds, I think. So making sure that the resources are made available there as well.
Great. I have maybe one final question that could be for any of you. So if anyone wants to jump in for that. So is the barrier to water reuse in agriculture down to perceptions of water quality for reuse not being regarded as acceptable for agriculture?
I can jump in. I don't think that the barrier is there. The barrier is mostly in the adoptions and the risk assessment linked to that, at least in Europe, through the regulations. The quality, it's a little bit more. The regulations push the quality standards a bit higher than what was in place, especially in Spain and other local countries in Europe. But I don't think that is an issue for, let's say, adoptions of reuse in general.
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump in just really quickly, Tallulah. I'd say one of the big issues that's really dominating thinking here about recycled water is treating recycled water as a premium product, and the rapid rise of data centers and their water requirements are very much in the sphere of high-end water quality, and I think high quality water recycling, and I think that's where we'll see a lot of that premium product go.
Mm-hmm. That's great. No, I think that's all we have time for. I'm not going to hold you guys any longer. We've already over time, so thanks so much for taking the time to answer some of those questions and for your amazing presentations, so which will be circulated with the panelists after this. But yes, thank you much for everyone for attending, and to our lovely speakers. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tallulah.
Thank you.
Have a good day.